For some of you who have been training in arm wrestling for a while, you may find that you have gotten stuck in your progression somehow. Maybe it's a certain lift that you've been doing, or maybe you just can't seem to catch up and beat that one guy no matter how hard you've been trying. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, has to be something wrong with my training. There's gotta be some secret exercise that I can do. And that might not be entirely wrong. But I want to first talk about a couple of things you should consider first before jumping to that conclusion. Beginner gains are real, but they are not magic. Of course, if you've been training in arm wrestling for 5, 6, 7, 10 years, then you would expect your progress to be much slower compared to someone who's only been doing the sport for a couple of months. But there is a big amount of variation when it comes to how fast people can improve. Some are slower, some are faster. So if you are a quote-unquote hard gainer, then your progress might come at a slower pace compared to others. And on top of that, improving your gym lifts is one thing, but applying them on the table is another matter altogether. I've had some coaching students already knowing how to execute a hook or top roll perfectly well by the end of their first lesson, but I've also had others who have taken months of work just to get the basic technique down. Especially at the beginning stages, this muscular coordination aspect of arm wrestling probably accounts for the biggest amount of variation in arm wrestling progress. We have to also consider the fact that we all have different starting points coming into this sport. Some of us come into arm wrestling with zero sports or weight training experience at all. On one hand, that means that that person would be able to milk a lot of newbie gains and would be able to progress very rapidly with consistent training. But on the other hand, it will take someone like that a considerably longer amount of time to reach a competitive level with their peers who may have come from a resistance training background before and already have a solid base to build off. And this begs the question of how are you determining your progress? Are you comparing yourself to your friends? Because that might not entirely be fair, even if you both started arm wrestling at the same time. And also, if you're trying to base your progress off of how well you do against a certain person at practice or in competition, you have to understand that that person is also training and progressing themselves. Even if you keep losing to the same person time and time again, it does not necessarily mean that you're not progressing. Your gym lifts could be going up at roughly the same rate theirs are, so you wouldn't exactly know. And that brings us to those of us who feel like our progress in terms of gym lifts have stalled. Before we get into anything technical, you have to ask yourselves these two very important things. Number one, have you been getting enough sleep? This is probably by far the most important thing you need as an athlete. If you haven't been getting a good amount of sleep, fixing your sleep schedule can almost be analogous to getting on PEDs. Listen to what Dr. Mike has to say about this.
Sleep is the best drug, so to speak. Now, in reality, is if you sleep close to the right amount, every other muscle building drug is way more powerful. An hour of extra sleep beyond what you need offers you nothing and actually has downsides. An hour of extra sleep that brings you from sleeping 2 hours less than you need to 1 less than you need is unreal powerful and comparable to tons of anabolic drugs. If you try to sleep 4 hours a night and you need 8, adding in another 4 hours roughly every night is the equivalent or more than taking essentially the kitchen sink of drugs. Sleep is that important. It is critical. It is foundational.
Number two, how is your diet? And by that, I mean firstly, are you on at least a maintenance or preferably on a caloric surplus? You do not take in enough food, you're just not going to build any muscle. Sure, as a beginner, you'll probably still be able to build some muscle, but after that initial phase, any strength gains you see are probably just going to be a result of increased muscle coordination, neurological efficiency, that sort of reason. Once that very basic caloric needs aspect is in order, then we start to look at, are you getting enough protein? Are you getting enough fat? Do you have any deficiencies? Are you just eating all junk food and drinking alcohol? Now, if you know for sure that your sleep is on point, you're getting your 8 hours, your diet is great, you have balanced meals, eating good quality food, then it's time to take a look at your training. Broadly speaking here, there are two aspects to this. How hard are you pushing yourself? And do you have enough time for recovery? And you'll notice that I'm not bringing up training methodology because I'm a firm believer that there are multiple ways to go about training that can yield great results. All about finding what works best for you, what you can stick with the longest. If you're having a hard time figuring this out by yourself, I do offer coaching and consultations on my website, link in the description below. Me and my team of coaches offer both text and video coaching and consultations, as well as in-person coaching if you're based in Singapore. Now back to the two questions. How hard are you actually pushing yourself during training? Your last reps look something like this. Are you never ever sore or even slightly beat up after your gym sessions? Like, do you always wake up the next day just feeling completely fresh, like you can do the exact same workout very easily again? If any of that applies to you, then bad news, you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough at the gym. Beginners can get away with this for a while, but if you already have at least a couple of years of experience, then this isn't gonna fly. But those of you who are pushing yourselves hard enough, then you have to make sure that you're giving yourself enough time to recover. And of course, this is already assuming that you already have your sleep and diet in order as mentioned early on in the video. Also, you have to consider that different muscle groups recover at different rates, and they can also handle different amounts of training frequencies.
For example, quads versus biceps. Even the biceps can be recovered to train hard again in maybe 2 days, maybe 3 days, they'll be ready. Quads might take 3 or 4 days to recover, but maybe even longer.
And I know I mentioned that I didn't really want to go into training methodology and all that stuff in this video, but as it relates to muscle recovery and training frequency, I think that is something worthwhile to look at. There is such a thing as overtraining, whether you want to believe it or not, and being in a chronically overtrained state is just going to do more harm than good. So guys, with all these general guidelines in mind, tell me about your own training experience. Have you hit any plateaus before? How did you overcome them? Share your experiences with me. I'd love to hear about them. I'm sure many of us can learn from each other as well. See you guys in the comment section, and I'll catch you beasts in the next one.